My name is Evelyn Marin. I'm 63 years old. I've lived in Charleston my entire life, long enough to know that in this city, manners can hide almost anything. I'd just finished watering the herbs on the porch when the phone rang, the old landline humming against the counter like a restless insect. The light outside had that golden tint that makes even cracked wood look polished. It should have been an ordinary evening. "Hi, Mom." Vanessa's voice poured through the line, warm, cheerful, almost too even. "Dylan's grilling tonight. We'd love to have you over. There's something we'd like to talk about. The future. Yours. Ours." The word future sat too neatly in the sentence. My daughter has always known how to frame things beautifully, even when they're broken. I told her I'd be there by 6, after hanging up. I stood for a long moment beside the window, watching the river light shift over the neighbor's magnolia. I could have called back, asked what this was really about. But curiosity has its own gravity. I dressed carefully, a soft linen dress. Pearl earrings Tom once gave me for our 20th anniversary, and drove over the bridge as the sky bruised into evening. Mount Pleasant looked washed and proper, every porch light glowing like it had been instructed to. Vanessa's house sat in a row of near-identical homes, white columns and trimmed azaleas performing success. She opened the door before I knocked. "Mom, you look lovely." She kissed my cheek. Her perfume was expensive and faintly sweet, the kind of scent that pretends not to try. Behind her, the dining room gleamed silver-polished. Candles lit, chairs angled perfectly. "You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble," I said. "Nonsense. We wanted tonight to feel special." Dylan stepped in from the patio. Tie loosened. A smile rehearsed for clients. "Evelyn," he said smoothly, "we've been meaning to sit down like this for ages. You've done so much for everyone. It's time we help make things easier for you." He gestured toward the table. At my place setting lay an envelope, thick and cream-colored, resting beside the knife. Vanessa poured me a glass of sparkling water, her bracelets whispering against each other. "It's just a little paperwork," she said lightly. "Something to organize your assets. A family trust, nothing complicated." Her eyes searched mine for reaction, but I'd learned long ago that silence can do more than words. I smiled and smoothed the napkin on my lap. The candle flames trembled between us, small and steady. "I appreciate the thought," I said. "It's kind of you to think ahead." The air tightened. Dylan's grin froze half an inch too wide. Vanessa reached for the envelope, sliding it closer until it touched my plate. "You'll feel better once it's signed," she said softly. "It's really just protection for all of us." I looked down at the neat handwriting on the seal, my name written like a claim. The chandelier above caught a flicker of my reflection in the polished silver. A woman composed, unmoved. I rested my hand beside the envelope but didn't open it. "Well," I said, keeping my voice light, "why don't we eat first?" Vanessa hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Of course." The sound of plates being adjusted filled the silence. Outside, the first crickets began their slow chorus. I took a sip of water, tasted nothing, and waited for the evening to unfold. Dinner was elegant in a way that made me feel like a guest, not family. Vanessa served grilled salmon with lemon butter, roasted vegetables arranged like a photograph. Dylan poured wine into tall glasses, though I noticed he filled his own more generously. The air smelled of rosemary and something faintly metallic, money, maybe, or nerves. They talked at first about safe things. Real estate prices, the heat wave, a friend's new baby. Vanessa laughed often, but too brightly, her eyes darting between me and Dylan. I matched her politeness, adding small comments here and there, until the room grew thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, she set down her fork and wiped her mouth with a linen napkin. "Mom, she began, her tone smooth but deliberate. Dylan and I have been doing some financial planning. We realized you might not have anyone helping you organize your things. My things, I asked. She smiled. Your accounts, the house, your retirement fund. We want to make sure everything is protected. Dylan leaned forward, elbows almost touching the table. You've worked your whole life, he said. You deserve security. We can handle the details, paperwork, taxes, all that complicated stuff. It's what I do. I watched the way his hand brushed Vanessa's arm, a silent cue for her to continue. She reached under her chair and brought out the same cream-colored envelope from earlier. The table's candlelight caught the gold trim as she placed it between us. This is a trust agreement, she said softly. It'll just make things smoother. We'd both be trustees with you. Everything remains in the family. The envelope's flap was still sealed. I touched it gently, feeling the weight inside. A family trust, I repeated. And you've already filled it out. Vanessa's cheeks flushed. We started the draft. Just to save you time. Dylan had his lawyer look at it. It's perfectly standard. Dylan nodded, eyes gleaming with practiced reassurance. It's nothing binding until you sign. Of course, but if you do, everything transfers automatically to the trust. No probate issues, no taxes later. Seamless. I leaned back slightly. My pulse was steady, but I felt the edges of the room sharpen. The chandelier above us hummed faintly with electricity, light pooling across the polished table like water, waiting to tip. That's very considerate of you, I said. My voice even. What made you think of it? Vanessa hesitated just long enough for Dylan to answer. Planning ahead, he said smoothly. Families lose fortunes by being sentimental. You have assets tied up in that house prime property in this market. It could generate income instead of sitting there. The word sitting landed like an insult. That house was where Tom and I spent 3 decades building a life, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. It wasn't sitting, it was standing, exactly where it was meant to be. Vanessa must have seen something in my face because she reached across the table and touched my wrist. Mom, please don't misunderstand. We just want to help. You've done so much alone. I looked at her hand, her perfect manicure, the faint indentation where her wedding ring pressed against her skin. That's generous, I said quietly, but I manage fine. Dylan's smile didn't falter, but his tone shifted, soft with insistence. It's really just for convenience. Think of it as simplifying things for when well. Someday, you'll want everything in order. The way he said someday made the air turn cold. Vanessa exhaled, the charm cracking just slightly. It's just paperwork, she said. A signature, and it's done. I looked down at the envelope again. For all its politeness, it felt heavy enough to tilt the table. The candle nearest me burned lower, wax spilling over the rim. I imagined opening it, imagined the ink, the lines, the quiet trap written in legal terms. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap. You're right, I said softly. Everything should be in order. Relief flashed across Vanessa's face too quickly. Dylan raised his glass in a small toast, as if victory could be sealed with Cabernet. I smiled, though my chest felt like stone. I'd spent a lifetime learning how to wait out storms without slamming doors. Let's finish dinner, I said. Lifting my glass, we can look at the papers afterward. Vanessa nodded eagerly. Dylan relaxed. And as they began to talk again, I studied their reflections in the glass of the dining room window, 2 people rehearsing sincerity in the house I had built for love, not leverage. When dinner ended, Vanessa rose quickly, gathering plates with the speed of someone eager to move the evening toward its real purpose. Dylan followed her into the kitchen, their voices low, the clink of silver against porcelain marking the rhythm of their coordination. I stayed seated, my glass of water half empty. the envelope still beside my plate like a guest who refused to leave. When they returned, Vanessa carried a neat stack of documents, secured with a gold clip. "Here," she said gently, setting them in front of me. "It's easier if you see it yourself." I unfolded the first page. The paper was smooth and thick, the ink a deep blue that looked almost elegant. It began with familiar words: trust, security, family. But each line that followed pulled another thread loose from what those words were supposed to mean. Every account I owned, every property in my name, every investment Tom and I had built over decades. All of it was to be transferred into a family trust for the purpose of consolidated management and long-term stability. The trustees, it stated, would be Vanessa and Dylan. My name appeared only once, next to the word grantor. Like an afterthought, I read slowly, line by line, feeling the faint tremor under my palm where the table met my wrist. The smell of rosemary from dinner lingered, mingling with the faint scent of ink and candle smoke. Dylan leaned back in his chair, pretending casualness, but his eyes flicked toward me with quiet calculation. "It looks complicated," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But I'm sure you can explain." "Of course," Vanessa said, sliding closer. "It just means everything stays protected. If anything happens, Dylan and I handle it. No confusion. No taxes. You don't need to worry about anything." Her smile was bright, perfect, and practiced. It reminded me of the smile she used to wear during school recitals when she'd forget her lines but knew the camera was still on her. "You'd handle it," I repeated. "Yes," she said quickly, mistaking my repetition for agreement. "It'll all be smoother this way. You've worked so hard, let us take care of things now," Dylan chimed in, his tone polished and certain. "It's not about control, Evelyn. It's about efficiency. You shouldn't have to manage bank statements or property taxes at this stage. You should enjoy yourself." At this stage, I turned another page. My signature line waited near the bottom, crisp and blank, already marked with adhesive tabs where I should sign. They'd even prepared a pen, sleek, black, resting beside my water glass. I wondered whether it was new or one they kept for occasions like this. Vanessa's hand brushed my arm. "Mom, you trust me, don't you?" she asked softly. I met her gaze, up close. I saw the faintest quiver near her mouth, a tiny pulse at her temple. Fear or anticipation I couldn't tell. The candlelight caught the gold of her earrings, the same pair Tom bought her for her college graduation. I'd saved for weeks to surprise her. She'd cried that day. Now, she only smiled. "Of course I do," I said, folding the papers neatly back into the envelope. "But I like to read everything twice." "Old librarian habit." Dylan's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Naturally," he said. "But these are standard documents. My lawyer drafted them himself. Nothing tricky. I'm sure he's excellent." I replied, "Still, I've learned it's the small print that teaches the biggest lessons." I placed the envelope beside my plate, aligned it perfectly with the table's edge. Vanessa reached for her wine, fingers trembling just enough to make the glass ring faintly against the stem. The sound filled the silence between us. I stood, smoothing the skirt of my dress. "It's late," I said quietly. "Thank you for dinner." Vanessa blinked, her smile faltering for the first time. "But you haven't signed. Not tonight." I lifted my purse from the chair. "I'll read it in the morning, with fresh eyes." "It deserves that. Don't you think Dylan said nothing?" Vanessa nodded, slow and uncertain, her brightness dimming like a light that had burned too long. I kissed her cheek before leaving, the way mothers do out of muscle memory. Her skin was warm, but the air between us had cooled. Outside, the night smelled of salt and rain. I walked toward my car without looking back, the envelope's weight still on my fingertips long after I'd set it down. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too still. The kind of quiet that hums behind your ribs. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, its edges catching the faint light from the street lamp outside. I made tea and read every page again, slowly, methodically, the way I used to review old manuscripts at the library. By dawn, the words stopped stinging. They became instructions, and I had already decided what to do with them. When morning came, I called the bank first, then my attorney's office. The voice that answered was calm, measured, familiar. Helen Boyd had handled Tom's estate years ago, a woman who spoke in facts instead of comfort. "Bring everything," she said, "and don't sign a thing." By noon, we were sitting across from each other in her office downtown. She read the contract in silence, her brow tightening halfway through. "This isn't a trust," she said finally. "It's a transfer of ownership. If you'd signed, they'd have full control." I nodded. I had already understood that much. What I hadn't expected was how steady I felt hearing it out loud. Helen leaned back, studying me. "Do you want me to handle it quietly?" "Not yet," I said. "I'd like to return the favor first." That evening, I called Vanessa. My voice sounded almost cheerful. "Sweetheart," I said, "I've been thinking about the paperwork. I might have something you should see too." There was a pause. Faint surprise breathing through the line. "Of course. Mom, what is it?" "Oh," I said lightly, folding the papers on my lap. "Just something I've prepared." The silence that followed was small but sharp enough to cut through both ends of the line. The following evening, I returned to Vanessa's house. She opened the door wearing a smile too bright for the hour, the kind people use when they've already decided how the night will end. The table was set again, though the plates this time were empty, the candles unlit. Dylan stood behind her, arms folded, trying to look casual and failing. "Mom," Vanessa said, "we didn't expect you so soon. Did you finish reading everything I did?" I said, stepping inside, and I thought it best we discuss it together. I brought someone who can explain things more clearly than I can. Her confusion flickered just long enough to register before she heard footsteps behind me. Helen Boyd entered the room with quiet confidence, her gray suit crisp, her hair pulled into a simple knot. She nodded politely at Vanessa and Dylan. "I'm Ms. Boyd," she said. "Evelyn's attorney." Dylan's posture stiffened. "Attorney," he repeated, as though the word itself were an accusation. "Yes," Helen said calmly, placing her briefcase on the table. "I understand there's a contract in question." Vanessa's voice faltered. "It's just a family document for organization. We wanted everything clear, no confusion later." Helen smiled lightly. "Of course. Organization is admirable. Let's take a look." I handed her the envelope. She unfolded the pages with deliberate care, her movements as neat as her words. The only sound in the room was paper sliding over polished wood. After a few moments, she closed the file and met Vanessa's eyes. "This is not a family trust," she said evenly. "This is a legal transfer of assets, full ownership, no shared management. Once signed, Evelyn would relinquish all control of her home, accounts, and estate. Every clause directs authority to you and Mr. Lowe." Color drained from Vanessa's face. Dylan opened his mouth, but Helen raised a hand slightly, not rudely, simply enough to pause him. "If you weren't aware of the implications," she continued, "I'm happy to clarify them." "It was just meant to protect her," Vanessa said quickly, the words tumbling out. "We'd never." Helen's tone remained even. "Intent doesn't change the result. A document like this can't be signed without full understanding, And it won't be for a long second. No one spoke. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen filled the silence like background music to a confession. I looked at my daughter. She stood perfectly still, the same way she used to when she was a child, caught lying about a broken vase, face composed. Eyes wide, pride refusing to bend. "Mom," she said softly, "you didn't need to bring a lawyer." "Apparently," I said. "I did." Dylan straightened, his voice tight. "You're overreacting. Evelyn, we were only thinking of your security." Helen gathered the papers back into her case, snapping it shut with a quiet finality. "Security is built on honesty," she said, "not assumption." I turned toward the door, my hand light on the handle. "Thank you for explaining," I said to Helen. She gave a small nod. "My pleasure." Behind me, Vanessa whispered my name just once. Small, uncertain. I didn't turn back. Some truths, once spoken, don't require an echo. After Helen left, I drove home through the quiet streets of Charleston, the kind that seemed to glow after sunset, oak branches arching over the road, porches lit like small lanterns. My house waited at the end of Bayview Lane, its pale shutters and wide porch standing steady against the night. I'd owned it for 38 years, though it had only truly become mine after Tom died. When we first bought it, it was barely standing a sagging frame and a roof that leaked whenever the tide rose. Tom had called it a good house with tired bones. We spent weekends sanding floors, replacing glass, painting walls that still smelled faintly of salt and mold. We laughed more then. The laughter filled the cracks before the plaster did. After the funeral, the house turned hollow. The sound of his voice disappeared so suddenly that I caught myself leaving the radio on, just to fill the space. The first few months, I lived in the kitchen, too afraid of the silence and the rest of it. Then one day, in early spring, I walked into his old workshop and saw the hammer he'd left on the workbench. The handle was smooth from years of his grip, the metal cold against my palm. That was the day I decided I wouldn't sell, no matter what people advised. I learned how to use his tools slowly, carefully, stubbornly. When the porch railing splintered, I replaced it. When the upstairs window cracked during a storm, I balanced on the ladder myself, nails in my mouth, rain running into my sleeves. My neighbors offered help, but pride is its own scaffolding. The house didn't just shelter me, it kept me upright. Each change I made carried memory. The pale blue in the hallway came from the dress I wore the day Tom proposed. The brass handles in the kitchen were the same ones we'd seen in a Savannah antique shop 20 years ago, the day we decided the house would one day have room for a library. Every corner was layered with our life. Sometimes, when the humidity crept in at night, I'd open the windows and listen to the frogs down by the marsh. The air smelled like brine and jasmine, and for a moment, it felt like Tom was still in the next room, tightening a hinge or whistling off key. It wasn't a grand house by Charleston standards. Tourists never photographed it, but every beam and nail had passed through my hands. It was honest. It was earned. Now, as I stood in the doorway again, I ran my fingers over the frame, feeling the small dents from years of use. Vanessa had grown up here her first steps, her first scraped knee on the porch steps, her laughter echoing through the stairwell on Christmas mornings. The same house she once begged me to keep was now the one she wanted to claim. I walked to the dining room, set down my purse, and stared at the polished wood of the table Tom had built. He'd carved initials into the underside E+T. Home enough, I smiled despite myself. The surface was worn smooth by years of coffee cups and late-night letters, but it had never failed us. I could almost hear Helen's voice from earlier that day, measured, steady. It's not a trust. It's a transfer of ownership. The words hit differently now. They didn't just mean signatures or numbers, they meant erasure. The thought of someone else deciding which walls to paint or what furniture to sell felt like a second kind of burial. I sat for a long time, tracing the grain of the table, the lines running like veins. It struck me that love, when built into wood and paint, doesn't fade. It hardens, it stays, outside. The porch light flickered once. The bulb Tom had wired himself years ago. I made a note to replace it tomorrow. Not because it needed fixing, but because it deserved attention. No one was going to take this house from me. Not while I could still lift a hammer, still remember the sound of his voice, still feel the warmth of all that had been built with bare hands and quiet determination. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, tracing pale shapes across the floorboards Tom once sanded smooth. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, letting the quiet settle before it was interrupted by memory. It came not as a flood, but as a slow, unfolding Vanessa at 8 years old, standing on this very porch with a lunchbox too big for her hands. Back then, she was all curls and questions. Tom adored her, though he spoiled her in ways I tried to balance. When she wanted a new doll, he bought 2. When she refused to do her chores, he laughed and did them for her. She'll learn responsibility later, he'd say. I wanted to believe him. We worked hard to give her more than we'd had: private school, piano lessons, trips to Hilton Head each summer. She grew up surrounded by everything we thought love could buy: security, comfort, pride. But comfort can be a slow kind of hunger. It teaches a child that the world will rearrange itself around their wants. By the time Vanessa turned 15, she'd learned how to get what she wanted without raising her voice. She'd smile, tilt her head, and ask as if she were offering you a favor. I saw it first when she convinced her father to trade in our old car for a new one so we wouldn't have to worry about repairs. Later, it was the tuition for a prep school she'd found through a friend's parents. Everyone's going there, she'd said, and I don't want to be left behind. Tom agreed before I could object. That was the beginning of her distance. She came home on weekends, her words sharper, her laughter smaller. She complained about how small our house felt, how Charleston was slow, how her classmates had beach homes and drivers. I told myself it was just adolescence, that she'd grow out of it once she learned what real work looked like. But she never really had to learn. Tom handled the bills, the cars, the little crises. I managed what he didn't, quietly patching gaps he didn't see. After his death, I thought Vanessa would step closer. Instead, she moved faster college out of state. Then the internship that turned into a job she said was too important to call home about. I sent birthday cards, care packages, and long messages she answered with 2 words: thanks, Mom. When she married Dylan, I didn't recognize the girl who'd once fallen asleep with her head in my lap. Her wedding was perfect in every visible way: white roses, champagne, string quartet. But her eyes that day were cold with calculation. I remember standing beside her, holding her bouquet while the photographer adjusted his lens, and thinking she looked like someone who had won something, not someone who had found love. Now, sitting alone in the same kitchen where she once practiced her spelling, I realized how early the transformation had begun. She hadn't learned dependence from neglect, but from abundance. We had given her everything. And in doing so, we'd built a life where she mistook love for convenience. I reached across the table, touching the spot where her lunchbox once rested, the faint dent still visible in the wood. Maybe control doesn't arrive all at once. Maybe it starts quietly with a father's indulgence, a mother's forgiveness, a child's smile that hides a seed of expectation waiting to bloom. In the days after Helen's visit, the house felt different. It wasn't just quieter, it was alert. like a living thing aware of an approaching storm. I moved through it more deliberately, noticing every mark, every creak in the floorboards. I'd once thought the past lived only in photographs, but it turned out memory had a scent, a sound, a weight. Vanessa called 3 days later. Her voice was careful, softer than usual. Mom, I hope you're not upset about the papers. We were only trying to make things easier. I know, I said, keeping my tone even. You've always wanted what's best. There was a pause. The faint hum of her air conditioner behind her words. Good, she said, because I was thinking maybe it's time to downsize. The house must be too much for you now, too much. She hesitated. Well, it's old, big, expensive to maintain. You could sell it, buy something smaller by the water. Imagine how free you'd feel. The suggestion wasn't new. She'd mentioned it a year earlier, right after Dylan's business hit a slow quarter. I'd loaned them money then, a sum I tried to forget, but never could enough to cover their mortgage payment and keep them from losing the townhouse they'd bought too soon. She'd called it a short-term favor. That was nearly 18 months ago. Now, her voice carried that same careful sweetness. You've always said this house is full of memories, she went on, but you could take those anywhere. Let us help you list it. I know people. I looked around the kitchen, the shelves Tom built, the worn patch of tile near the sink where he used to stand each morning making coffee. The idea of handing those memories to strangers felt like peeling skin from bone. I'll think about it, I said. You always say that, she replied. Her tone shifted, the charm thinning. You can't live there forever, Mom. It's not practical. I almost smiled at the word. Vanessa had always used practical when she meant profitable. That night, I took out the old ledger where I recorded every expense since Tom died. The pages smelled faintly of pencil and dust. I found the note from the day I wired the money to Vanessa, a tidy figure circled in ink, with a small check mark beside it. I'd marked it temporary loan. Underneath, I had written for love. The next morning, I went to the mailbox and found an envelope from Vanessa. Inside was a folded letter and a single check half the amount I'd lent her. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and efficient. The note read, partial repayment. Things are tight right now, but we'll handle the rest soon. Love, Vanessa. The word love looked out of place, smaller than the rest, as if it had been added last. Later that week, Dylan stopped by unannounced. He stood on my porch, tan and smiling, a man too comfortable in other people's doorways. Evelyn, he said, I wanted to talk about that trust thing. Vanessa's been worried. You know how she gets when she thinks you're upset. I'm not upset, I said, opening the screen door just enough to meet his eyes. I'm informed. He laughed awkwardly. That's good, because we really just want to protect you. You've got a lot tied up here. Houses don't age gracefully in this climate. Neither do some people, I said, and his smile faltered for the first time. He shifted, straightened his sleeves. Look, if you ever change your mind about selling, let me know. I've got investors who'd pay cash. I'm sure you do. He started to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Tell you what, he said instead, why don't you come to dinner Sunday? We can talk it through like a family. I closed the door gently between us. I'll think about it, I said again. When his footsteps faded down the porch steps, I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the weight of the wood. The paint there had chipped in one corner, Tom's old brushstroke from years ago. I rubbed it with my thumb, tracing the line that had held longer than most promises. The house groaned softly as the evening heat settled in. I knew that sound. It was the timbre of something strong under pressure, something built to last but beginning to test its limits. By the end of that week, the Charleston heat pressed down like a damp quilt, heavy and unrelenting. I sat at my kitchen table with a folder of copies, Vanessa's family trust, my bank statements, the check she'd mailed back, everything that now felt less like family and more like evidence. I called Helen and asked if she could meet. Her office overlooked the river, framed by palmettos and old brick. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper, a scent that always made me think of integrity. Helen greeted me with that same calm I'd come to rely on. She didn't rush, didn't pry, simply gestured for me to sit. I laid the folder between us. I've read through every line. I said, I know what it is, but I want you to look again to make sure I'm not letting emotion make things larger than they are. Helen adjusted her glasses and began reading, the slow, deliberate pace of someone who knows where danger hides. I watched her expression tighten halfway through, the faint furrow at her brow deepening until she finally set the pages down. You were right, she said quietly. It's worse than I thought. She tapped the section near the end with one manicured finger. This clause here, authority of management and delegation, would give your daughter full control over every asset, financial or physical. You'd have no legal ownership left. Even your right to withdraw funds could be revoked at their discretion. My throat felt dry. So if I'd signed, you'd have lost everything. Helen said, house, accounts, investments. It's an outright transfer of ownership disguised as a trust. I exhaled slowly, surprised at how steady it came out. And she would have known that. She might have understood only what Dylan told her, Helen said carefully. But yes, she'd have known it meant control. I looked at the window, at the river moving in its slow, deliberate current. Then we'll need to make sure there aren't other surprises. Helen nodded. I can start with financial checks. We'll need to verify account access, property deeds, insurance policies, anything with your signature attached. Quietly. Don't mention this to them yet. Her voice had that tone people use when handling glass that might shatter. I can be quiet, I said. I've been practicing that my whole life. She smiled faintly. Good. Patience will serve you better than anger right now. I watched her gather the documents into neat stacks. What happens next? We make copies, track activity, and see if there's been any movement unauthorized withdrawals, new signatures, or attempts to change beneficiaries. If something's been filed, we'll find it. She paused, then looked at me directly. And Evelyn, don't confront them yet. People who act out of desperation get careless when they think they've won. Let them keep believing that. Her words settled over me like calm water over fire. I realized then that Helen wasn't only building a legal defense, she was handing me back my composure. When I left her office, the late afternoon light had softened, the sky over the Ashley River streaked with coral and silver. I walked toward my car, slowly, letting the air cool my thoughts. Patience. She'd said, let them think they've won. That evening, I sat on the porch, the old boards creaking beneath my feet. The magnolias were in bloom again, their scent thick in the air. I thought of Vanessa as a child, running barefoot across this very yard, chasing lightning bugs with her father's laugh trailing behind her. I wondered when she'd started seeing this home not as a legacy, but as leverage. Inside, the phone rang once, then twice. I let it. I knew her voice would be on the other end, smooth and sweet, testing the edges of my forgiveness. Instead, I poured myself a glass of iced tea, opened my notebook, and began to list every account, every file, every piece of paper that bore my name. The pen moved steadily, without hesitation. By the time the crickets began their chorus, I had filled 2 pages. Every note was a quiet promise, not revenge, not rage, but readiness. It was nearly a week before Vanessa came by. She didn't call first. She simply appeared at my door just before noon, wearing sunglasses though the sky was overcast. Her hair was unbrushed, her lipstick uneven. For a moment, she looked like the child she used to be, the one who would knock after a nightmare and crawl into my bed without asking. "Mom," she said softly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked in as if the walls might judge her, shoulders tight, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and brewed tea. I'd been cleaning, the kind of cleaning that helps thoughts find shape. "Tea?" I asked. She nodded, sitting at the kitchen table where the light fell in strips through the blinds. When I placed the cup before her, she didn't touch it. Her hands trembled slightly. And the silence between us stretched until she finally broke it. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," she said. "Dylan told me it was normal, that every family does it. He said it was just a formality." I sat down across from her, careful to keep my expression still. "You're talking about the trust." Her eyes filled fast, like a faucet turned open. "He said it would protect you, that it was better if we handled things. He's good with business. You know that." I thought I was helping. I listened quietly. I'd placed my phone on the counter behind me earlier, angled just enough to catch her voice. Helen's advice echoed in my mind. People reveal truth when they feel safe enough to lie. Vanessa leaned forward, pressing her palms against her temples. "You don't understand. Mother, he's been under so much pressure. The market's been terrible. And he borrowed against the townhouse without telling me. He said if we could just consolidate your assets, he could pay everything off and start fresh. I was trying to fix it before it got worse." Her words came in bursts, half confession, half justification. I let them fall without interruption. "I should have read it all," she continued. "But he said it would make you proud of us, that it would prove we were capable of taking care of you." I reached across the table and touched her hand lightly. "I believe you wanted that," I said, "but wanting and doing are different things." She pulled her hand back, wiping her face with the edge of her sleeve. "He made me feel like I owed him," she said, "like everything we had was because of his work. I didn't even realize how deep the loans went until last month." The weight in her voice wasn't entirely guilt. There was fear, too, the kind that grows when the foundation you've built starts to crack. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "you should have told me." "I couldn't," she said, shaking her head. "You've always been so strong." "I thought if I told you, you'd never look at me the same way." The irony made my chest ache. "I'm looking at you now," I said. She tried to laugh, but it came out small and uneven. "You think I'm selfish," she said. "But I swear, I thought I was saving us." "From what?" "From falling apart," she whispered. "From losing everything." Her voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw her as she once was standing at the school gate, crying because she'd lost a ribbon I could easily replace. That same helplessness, dressed now in adulthood and debt. I stood and fetched a hand towel, offering it to her. She took it, pressing it to her eyes. "You don't have to forgive me," she said, muffled behind the fabric. "I just wanted you to know it wasn't all my idea." I watched her for a long moment before answering. "You're my daughter," I said softly. "I'll always want to understand you, but you'll have to help me do that truthfully this time." She nodded, unable to speak. When she finally rose to leave, her perfume lingered, faint and familiar, but it carried something sour beneath it, like flowers left too long in water. When the door closed, I reached for my phone. The recording light blinked steady red. Every word was there, the fear, the confession, the thread that tied Dylan to it all. I saved the file, labeling it with the date, then placed the phone face down on the table. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the marsh, soft but certain. It would reach the house soon enough. 2 mornings after Vanessa's visit, Helen called. Her voice was calm but brisk, the way she spoke when things were about to turn serious. "I'd like you to meet someone," she said. "His name is Grant Mercer. He's worked with my office for years. Quiet, precise. You'll like him." When I arrived at her office, a man in his mid-40s was already there, tall, clean-cut. the kind of person who seemed to listen even when he wasn't speaking. He rose when I entered and offered a handshake firm but measured. "Mrs. Marin," he said, "I've read the overview. Helen tells me you're not easily shaken." "Not anymore," I replied. Helen gestured for us to sit. "Grant specializes in financial forensics," she explained. "If there's been any misuse of your name or accounts, he'll find it." He opened a slim laptop and began taking notes as I handed him a folder of my recent statements. I'd gathered them the night before, each page marked neatly with dates and annotations. "These are the ones you keep at home?" he asked. "Yes. I haven't accessed any online portals recently. Vanessa handled some digital payments last year after I had surgery. She said it would save me the trouble." Grant's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Then that's where we'll start." He spent the next hour asking quiet, precise questions, account numbers, property details, the names of old advisors I hadn't spoken to in years. Helen listened, interjecting occasionally, her tone steady, as though she'd walked this path with other families before. By the time we finished, I felt both exhausted and oddly lighter, like the truth had begun to rearrange itself into something visible. Grant promised to update us within a few days. "If there's movement, we'll know," he said. 3 days later, his email arrived at dawn. He asked us to meet immediately. Helen read over the printed report as I sat across from them, hands clasped, waiting. The first page showed my name, Evelyn T. Marin, printed above the header of a commercial loan agreement. The signature looked like mine, but wasn't. Beneath it was the date 2 months ago. Helen glanced up. "You never applied for this." "Of course not." Grant turned the next page. "It's a forged application for a credit line $750,000 using your home as collateral. The funds were transferred to an account held by a shell company called Lowen Properties. Its registration address is the same as your son-in-law's business." The room tilted slightly, but my voice stayed even. "So they borrowed in my name." "Yes," Grant said. "And they're behind on payments already. The investments they made with that money, mostly short-term real estate flips, are collapsing. I've traced at least 3 failed projects." Helen leaned forward. "If this continues, you'll be liable unless we intervene legally. We'll need to freeze any linked accounts immediately." I nodded slowly. The words reached me as if through water fraud, liability, foreclosure, each one dull and heavy. "They would have ruined you," Helen said quietly, "and likely justified it as saving themselves." Grant slid the final page across the table. It showed a text string recovered from an internal email chain. I recognized Vanessa's number, her messages brief and uncertain. Dylan's responses were longer, harder. "She'll never find out. She trusts us. Once the loan clears, we'll move the assets. Then it's done." I stared at the words, the black print as sharp as glass. "She knew," I murmured. "Or she wanted to believe he'd fix it." Helen said, "It doesn't matter now. What matters is protection. We'll secure everything in your name before they can touch another cent." Grant closed his laptop. "I'll handle the filings today. You won't be alone in this." When I stepped outside, the late morning sun was too bright, the air thick with the scent of rain coming in from the harbor. Across the street, a magnolia tree shed its petals one by one, each landing soft and silent on the pavement, beautiful, fragile, and impossible to put back once it had fallen. By the time Grant left Charleston, the evidence sat like a second presence in Helen's office. Every page, every screenshot, every email he'd unearthed had been copied, labeled, and sealed in a gray binder thick enough to feel like a weapon. Helen called it the proof folder. She said the name quietly, as if even the walls should respect it. We met in her office on a Tuesday morning. The blinds were half drawn, the air sharp with the scent of ink and paper. Helen's desk was covered in careful stacks, each document a piece of a puzzle I never asked to build. "We'll go step by step," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "These are the bank records. Here's the forged signature. My name, Evelyn T." Marin looped across the page in a hand almost identical to mine. Only the pressure was wrong. The downstroke on the M was heavier, deliberate. A man's hand trying to mimic a woman's certainty. Helen watched me quietly. "We'll have it verified by a handwriting expert." "But there's no doubt." I nodded, tracing the ink with my finger without touching it. "He took time practicing." "Likely," she said. "Dylan would have needed several samples. Maybe documents you left in their house or forms you signed with them present." The realization didn't sting, it settled. A truth like that doesn't break you. It simply rewires how you remember someone. Next came the bank slips transfers moving through accounts I'd never seen. Helen explained each one, her tone steady, almost clinical. "We'll include these in the affidavit. They show the pattern of movement, how he disguised withdrawals under business expenses." She opened another file, revealing screenshots of messages between Vanessa and Dylan. I could almost hear the voices behind them. Vanessa's short, hesitant texts. "Are you sure this is legal?" Followed by Dylan's confident replies. "Completely." "She'll thank us later." Helen leaned back, her eyes softening. "This part matters most," she said, lifting a small black recorder from her drawer. "The conversation with your daughter, did you save it?" I nodded. "I made a copy." She connected the recorder to her laptop, pressed play. The room filled with Vanessa's voice, trembling between apology and justification. "You don't understand. Mother, he said it was just to help you." Helen didn't interrupt. When it ended, she closed the lid slowly. "That will hold up," she said. "It shows knowledge of the plan and coercion by Dylan. More than enough to open a fraud investigation." I sat back, the weight of it all beginning to take shape. The binder on the desk wasn't just paper. It was history made tangible. Every decision, every silence bound between metal rings. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Helen said, "we protect you first. Your accounts, your deed, your identity. Then, when we're ready, we expose them, quietly, through the right channels. Let them hear the echo of their own choices." She pushed the binder toward me. "Keep this copy at home. Locked. Don't show it to anyone, especially not Vanessa." The binder felt cold against my palms. "She'll know something's changed," I said. Helen gave a small nod. "Then let her wonder." I carried it out to my car like something fragile and alive. The late afternoon air had turned thick, the harbor wind rising with the smell of salt and thunder. I placed the binder on the passenger seat, the seatbelt crossing over it like a strange form of protection. When I reached home, I set it on the table Tom had built and opened the drawer beneath. Inside lay his old toolbox, the one he'd used to repair this house, to fix what time tried to break. I lifted it out, placed the binder inside, and closed the lid. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt deliberate. Each piece of evidence wasn't revenge, it was restoration, a way to repair what had been taken without lifting a hammer. The porch light flickered once outside. I lit it. The proof was here now, solid and waiting. All that remained was knowing when to let the weight of it fall. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as the tide was turning at the marsh. Vanessa's voice was soft, nearly timid. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about everything. I hate how things ended. Dylan and I just want to have dinner. No talk of papers or lawyers, just peace. Peace." The word hung there, too fragile to touch. "All right," I said. "Dinner sounds fine." When I arrived 2 nights later, Helen was already waiting outside my gate. She wore a simple gray coat, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. I hadn't asked her to come, but she'd insisted. Peace is safest when witnessed, she'd said. We drove together in silence. Mount Pleasant was the same neat lawns, quiet porches, but the street to Vanessa's house felt narrower than before. The same porch lights glowed at the door, though this time they looked harsher, colder. Vanessa opened before I knocked. Her smile trembled at the edges. "Mom," she said, "you look beautiful." Then she saw Helen behind me and froze. "This is Helen," I said evenly. "She's family now, in her way." Dylan appeared from the kitchen. His sleeves rolled up, the smell of garlic clinging to the air. "Council present for dinner," he said with a brittle laugh. "Council present for clarity," Helen replied. We sat at the same table as before. The candles were lit again, but their light was thinner this time, leaving shadows between us. The silverware gleamed too sharply, like a smile that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Vanessa poured wine for everyone, but her hands weren't steady. She kept looking at me as though waiting for a cue to forgive, to forget, to fall back into the rhythm that had once defined us. "I wanted to start over," she said finally. "We all made mistakes. I should have asked you before involving Dylan's lawyer. It wasn't fair." Dylan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Helen took a sip of water, then set her glass down with quiet precision. "Starting over requires truth," she said. "Do you plan to offer any tonight?" Vanessa's eyes darted toward Dylan. He gave her a look, a silent warning disguised as calm. But something in her faltered. "Dylan told me it was harmless," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He said the papers were just to simplify things. I didn't read them all. I swear I didn't." I folded my napkin in half, aligning its corners perfectly. "And the loan in my name." Her breath caught. "I didn't know he'd used your signature." "Not until recently. He said it was temporary, that he'd fix it before you found out." Dylan slammed his fork down. "Enough, Vanessa." Helen didn't flinch. "We're not here for noise," she said. "We're here for facts." Vanessa's shoulders collapsed inward. "Mom," she whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought he'd keep us afloat." Her words came out thin, brittle. I studied her face, the makeup too careful, the smile gone. For the first time in years, she looked her age. I reached for my glass but didn't drink. "You could have come to me," I said. "You could have asked." "I was ashamed," she said, "and afraid of what you'd think." I said softly. "You've been afraid of the wrong things." No one spoke after that. The candles hissed as their wax reached the end, burning low, steady, final. Helen rose first, her chair barely making a sound against the tile. "We've heard enough for tonight," she said. Vanessa looked at me, desperate, her eyes searching for the kind of forgiveness I no longer mistook for love. I stood, adjusted my coat, and nodded once. As we left, the wind caught the porch light above the door. It flickered once, then steadied bright but cold, refusing to go out. The following evening, Vanessa called again. Her voice was steadier, almost rehearsed. "I'd like to make things right," she said. "Come tomorrow. Just you. No lawyers." I didn't answer immediately. The pause stretched long enough for her to fill it with hope. "All right," I said finally. "Tomorrow." Then, when I arrived, Helen was already waiting at the curb. "You didn't think I'd let you walk into that house alone, did you?" she said with a faint smile. I said nothing, only nodded, and together we climbed the front steps. Vanessa opened the door, relief flickering across her face. "Mom, thank you for coming." Then she saw Helen, and the light dimmed. "I told you, I wanted this to be private." "It will be," I said quietly, stepping past her. For a moment longer, the dining table was set again, white plates, polished silver, a meal barely touched, the same stage, different script. Dylan sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, his confidence restored. "I'm glad you came," he said. "We've all said things we regret. Maybe we can settle this without dragging anyone's name through the mud." I looked at him, then at Vanessa, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "You trust me, don't you?" I said softly. Vanessa blinked. "Of course I do." "Then," I said, my voice even, "you won't mind what I've prepared." Helen opened her briefcase. The sound of metal clasps snapping echoed through the room, one by one. She placed the documents on the table, the forged loan agreements, the transfers to Lowen Properties, the messages between them. The recording came last. Dylan's face lost its color first. Vanessa's followed. Helen pressed play. The small recorder filled the room with Vanessa's voice, fragile, pleading, undeniable. "You don't understand, Mother. He said it was just to help you." The silence afterward was absolute. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa stood too quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You recorded me," she whispered. "I listened." I said, "That's what mothers do." Dylan shoved his chair back. "This is blackmail." "No," Helen said evenly. "This is truth, and truth is admissible." He turned to Vanessa, his voice sharp. "You told her everything." She shook her head, tears cutting through her makeup. "You promised it was safe," she said. "You said no one would find out." He laughed bitterly. "You believed that." Their words began to blur accusations, half-truths, panic disguised as anger. I didn't speak again. I simply watched the distance grow between them. The same distance that had once stretched between my daughter and me. Helen gathered the papers back into her case, her movements unhurried. "We'll be in touch," she said, her tone almost kind. When we left, Vanessa stood in the doorway, her hands shaking. The air between us felt thin, like something fragile about to break. For years, I'd mistaken her silence for peace, her confidence for strength. But standing there now, I saw her as she truly was, my child. Lost in the ruins of her own making. Helen touched my arm gently as we walked toward the car. "It's done," she said, behind us. The porch light flickered once, then stayed dark. By the following week, the cracks had widened beyond repair. I didn't need to call anyone. Truth has a way of finding its own audience. News travels quietly in Charleston, through lawyers, clerks, and the faint hum of courthouse whispers. By the time I arrived at Helen's office on Monday morning, she was already on the phone. Her expression a calm mask of inevitability. "They've been served," she said after hanging up. "Fraud, forgery, and financial misrepresentation. The investigator will handle the rest." That afternoon, I returned home and waited. The air was heavy with salt and the promise of rain. I didn't want drama or confrontation, just the certainty of what was owed finally setting into place. It came quietly, as Helen had promised. A dark sedan pulled up in front of Vanessa's house across town. Grant Mercer stepped out, dressed in a simple gray suit, holding a slim folder in one hand. He didn't knock loudly, just 2 firm taps before the door opened. From my car down the street, I could see the exchange through the glass pane. Dylan answered first, his posture defensive. Vanessa appeared behind him, her expression pale but expectant. Grant handed over the envelope, spoke briefly, then nodded once. Whatever he said made Dylan's face twist into something almost feral. Moments later, the shouting began. I didn't need to hear the words to understand. Dylan's arms moved sharply, gestures full of accusation. Vanessa reached for him, but he jerked away. A glass shattered somewhere inside. The porch light flickered, then darkness. Grant emerged moments later, untouched, his expression unreadable. He paused at the bottom of the steps, took out his phone, and made a short call before driving off. The rain started just after. I stayed until the lights of a police cruiser turned the wet pavement blue. The officers moved calmly, the way people do when they've practiced for scenes like this. Helen called an hour later. "It's confirmed," she said. "The accounts are frozen." The investigators found more loans under different names, documents tied to other investors. It's unraveling fast. I didn't feel triumph, only a strange, aching quiet, the kind that fills a room when something heavy has finally fallen away. Later that evening, I walked through my house, switching off each lamp one by one. The rhythm steadied my breathing. In the living room, I paused beside Tom's old armchair. The faint smell of cedar still lingered, though it had been years since he'd sat there. Through the rain-streaked window, I could just see the edge of the magnolia tree he'd planted the year Vanessa was born. Its branches swayed under the storm, bending but refusing to break. The phone rang once more. Helen's voice was softer this time. "It's over, Evelyn," she said. "They've confessed. Dylan's being charged. Vanessa's cooperating." I thanked her, then hung up. For a moment, I simply stood there, listening to the rain against the porch roof. Justice doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It moves like the tide, quiet, certain, and unstoppable once it turns. I turned on the porch light before going upstairs. The beam cut through the rain, steady and unblinking, casting long, trembling shadows across the wet brick path. The storm would pass by morning. It always did. Weeks passed before the quiet began to feel natural again. The days grew longer, the air softer. Charleston drifted into spring, and the house finally matched the rhythm of its season, steady, unhurried, alive in its own silence. I changed the locks first. It wasn't about fear. It was about reclaiming the small gestures of safety. The locksmith, a kind man with careful hands, whistled while he worked. When he finished, he handed me the new keys, bright and unfamiliar in my palm. I slipped one onto my ring, its weight a quiet promise that this home belonged only to me again. The room smelled of lemon oil and open windows. The old creaks in the floor no longer startled me. They sounded like memory instead of warning. I repainted the front door the same deep blue Tom had chosen decades ago and replaced the porch bulb that had flickered through every storm. The first night it stayed on without trembling. I stood beneath it longer than I meant to, just breathing in the light. The proof folder now rested in the small safe under the stairs. Helen had insisted I keep it, though I doubted I'd ever open it again. It was enough to know it was there, proof of endurance, not bitterness. One morning, as I sorted through the mail, I found an envelope without a return address. Inside was a single piece of stationery from a hotel in Savannah. The handwriting was neat, but unfamiliar, as though written by someone unsure of her own hand. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm learning how to start over. Thank you for what you didn't say." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The letter trembled slightly in my fingers, the way grief sometimes does when it hasn't fully healed. I folded it once and placed it in the drawer beside Tom's old tools. Some things didn't need answering. Some endings didn't need to be rewritten. That evening, I brewed tea, opened the porch door, and sat where the magnolia tree cast its long, dappled shadow over the yard. The air smelled of rain and new grass. Inside, the clock ticked steadily. The house, at last, was quiet, and the quiet no longer asked for anything in return. Dusk settled over the marsh, soft and gold, the way Charleston evenings have of forgiving the day. The air was heavy with magnolia and salt. And somewhere beyond the trees, a heron cut a slow line across the sky. I stood on the porch steps, a cup of tea cooling between my hands, and watched the light shift against the horizon. The house behind me was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. I had finished repainting the kitchen that morning, the pale cream walls catching the late light in a way that made the space feel wider, gentler. There were no papers on the table now, no voices raised, no echoes of argument, just the steady tick of the clock and the hum of a home restored to itself. I walked to the end of the porch and ran my hand along the railing Tom had built so many years ago. The wood was smooth beneath my fingers, worn by time but still strong. He had wired the porch light himself one spring afternoon, muttering about the cost of electricians. It had flickered through every storm since then, through grief, through betrayal, through the long nights of waiting that had once filled this house. The new bulb gleamed softly when I turned it on. The warm glow spilled across the porch boards, stretching toward the yard where the magnolia tree stood in bloom. For years, I'd kept that light on out of habit, waiting for the sound of a car pulling in, a voice at the door, an apology that never came. Tonight, I turned it on for a different reason. This light isn't for waiting anymore, I said quietly, my voice steady in the gathering dark. It's for peace. The words hung there, neither prayer nor declaration, just truth made simple. I stayed a while, listening to the crickets begin their evening song, the world softening around me. Across the street, another porch light flicked on, then another, small beacons along the quiet lane. It felt almost like a language one that didn't need forgiveness to be understood. When I finally went inside, I left the light burning. It didn't belong to the past anymore. It belonged to everything still ahead.